if you see, Mr. Compiler, if you see that the first number variable contains a value that is greater, then print this out. If you also see that the first number variable if you also see that the first number variable contains a value that is equals to the second number variable, then also print this message on the command prompt. So we have essentially added, or we have essentially told two stuff using this one single relational operator to our compiler. So we are telling our compiler, either you check first you will have to check whether the value contained in the first number variable is greater than the second number variable's value, or you will also have to check if you see that the variable if you see that the first variable contains a value that is not greater, then check for the second thing. The second part of this relational operator is the equals to sign. So we are also telling the compiler that if you find that the first variable is not greater, then check whether the first variable is equals to the second variable. If they're equal, then print this message out. So we are essentially telling that if you find either to be true, or we are telling if you find that it's greater, then print this message out, or if you find this two variables equal, then also print this message out. But we are not going through this else clause or else if clause. The reason behind is that it works differently. So we have only added the greater than symbol. Now the greater than symbol is exclusive. That means in the previous one we have included that if it's greater and if it's equals to, like even if you add something like this, let's see. Okay, now this time the first number variable contains a value that's actually greater than the second number variable's value. So let's have a look at the output. Let's bring up the command prompt. Let's clear this screen. Let's recompile the code, and let's run the executable. So we also get the same message like before. The reason behind is that your compiler is actually, because the if conditioning part or the if conditional part occurs at the very first moment, and our compiler will read each line, or it will start reading line by line. That's why we are getting this message on our command prompt. Now we are telling the compiler that if you find that the first number variable contains a value that's greater than the second number variable, then you'll have to print this message out. And also if you find that the first number variable contains a value that's equals to the second number variable's value, then you will also have to print this message out. So we are essentially combining two stuff using one single relational operator. So because right now the first number variable contains a value that's greater than the second number variable's value, that's why we are looking at the first message that's being printed out by this if clause. Now why aren't we looking, you might be asking that, why aren't we looking at a message that's being printed out by this else if clause? The reason behind is that when your compiler starts reading each line, or it reads line by line, it first encounters this if clause. So because at the very first if clause it sees that the condition is true, that's why it's executing the first if clause on our command prompt. And likewise, as I've said before, if it prints out or if it executes this first if block, then it will obviously ignore the rest of the if conditioning. So when it ignores this if, else if and else, you will only get the message from the if clause. That's why you don't have the else if clause. It's basically ignoring the rest of the part because the first condition is true. So there are two basic stuff in here. The first thing is that we have seen that this message will be printed out if our condition is true when both of these variables are equal, and this message will also be printed out when the first variable is actually greater than the second variable. But in this context, like this else if context, it's a little bit different. The difference is that in the condition we see first number is greater than the second number variable. So this else if condition will only work when the variable first number contains a value that's always greater than the second number variable. If you put something like this, then your condition in the else if clause will not work. Let me show you that. So let's actually change this part. Okay, let's change this to not equals to. Okay, and now let's actually save this. Let's get back to the command prompt. Let's clean up this screen and let's recompile the code. Now we can run the executable file. So the executable file tells us, or the script actually tells us, that they are not equal. So it's actually giving us the message from the else clause. Now the else clause is being triggered because likewise